Hello everyone, welcome to the Scumdog's Kennel. I'm your host, Chris Williams, and in today's Cryptid Corner mini-episode, I have once again two bizarre stories to tell you all about today, folks. Both stories are out there, and we're going to get into them today. Let's start off with the first story, titled, North Dakota Ranchers Chilling Bull Mutilation. 2 healthy bulls found dead, 1 surgically cut, and once again, go back to the subject of cattle mutilation. Let's get into it now. Several years ago, during a fall cattle move on a family farm and ranch in North Dakota, CJ's family realized that a few bulls were missing from the pasture. First, the situation seemed explainable. There was a creek, brush, and plenty of cover where cattle could temporarily hide, but what was later found in the pasture left the family, a veterinarian, and a sheriff's deputy with no clear answers. That is an opening, folks, and gives an idea exactly what we'll be reading. But let's read the case file with a little more information before you actually hear the story itself. Date, fall, exact year not given. Time not given. Location, North Dakota. Specific county not given. Setting, family farm and ranch. Cattle pasture, creek, bottom, bushy tree rows, and nearby field. Witnesses, ranch family member, approximately 6th grade at the time. Reported by CJ. Phenomena, unexplained cattle deaths, and apparent bull mutilation. Environmental conditions, fall pasture conditions, dark and very quiet during the deputy's nighttime inspection. So, we have multiple witnesses here, folks, including of varying age and of respectable dispositions as well, folks. Let's get into the actual story and what the witnesses actually saw, detailed fully by one of them, folks. Let's get into this article and story and read exactly what the entire ordeal was about. I have a story you might be interested in. It has been a couple of years since it happened, but I can still remember it very well. My family are farmers and ranchers. One fall, we started moving cattle closer to home for the winter. We had been moving cattle from the heifer pasture and noticed we were short a few bulls. At first, we were not too worried. There is a creek in that pasture, and we figured they were probably holed up somewhere in the brush. A couple of days later, Dad was out in a field and came across one of the missing bulls. It was dead in the middle of the field. Coyotes and eagles had already been eating on it, so we could not tell much from the body. Still, Dad thought it was odd. The bull had been healthy just a couple of days earlier, and there was no obvious sign of how he ended up dead out there. Well, that's strange. Usually with cattle mutilations with no clear indication of how the bull was killed, folks, well, usually people just say they probably bled and died, but usually with these kinds of cases, the cow has no blood in it or around it at the site of where the carcass was found. And also animals and, well, scavengers usually avoid the body completely. Usually there are no marks from basically predators trying to chew on it because it seems to basically, well, the scene seems to repel them. Either way, let's continue with the article. When Dad found the bull, there was no clear signs of how it had died, but there were mutilations. The bull was missing its genitalia. All the missing parts looked as if they had been surgically cut out in perfectly round circles. At that point, Dad called a veterinarian to come out and look at it. As soon as she saw it, she said, "I can't help you," and left. Bulls are expensive, and this was not a natural death. We did not want it happening again, so Dad called the sheriff to come out and take a look. Smart idea, but I'm surprised that basically the sheriff would come out as soon as he heard about this bull being dead, folks. Then again, because when I hear about this sort of thing, folks, I can only imagine that basically the sheriff thought, was this some sort of cattle mutilation, perhaps? Am I going to basically be made a fool of, perhaps? I mean, the veterinarian basically clearly thought maybe that, folks, because she just left, because that's the feeling I get. But let's read on. By the time I had gotten off the school bus, I went along to take the sheriff's deputy out to the bull. That was the first time I saw it. I think I was in about 6th grade then, and I made sure my gopher gun had a full magazine before we headed out. For perspective, the sheriff's deputy had set some weightlifting records at our school. I knew him because he had given me rides to the gun club from time to time, so I knew how he usually acted. Dad had me ride with him to help watch for rocks and get there in the dark. He had every single light turned on, and he was using his hand flashlight to scan the creek and the rows of bushy trees all around us. He was very nervous and constantly on edge. That made me very uneasy, especially considering where we were. It was very quiet that night. I know a 17 HMR would not do much against a bad guy, but it would be something, and I tried not to stay too far from it. So, at the very least, he knew he was basically under-equipped, but he felt safe enough with the deputy and with his, well, go for a gun, folks. But let's get back to the article and see where this goes now. The deputy took some pictures, and we really tried to find a bullet hole, a cut throat, or dirt in the esophagus, anything that might tell us the cause of death. We even rolled the bull over, but we still could not find anything. To this day, I do not know how those bulls died, but I know it was not a natural death. We still have that pasture, and I still think about it every time I ride through there. I am almost always packing some heat when I do. From the little research I've done, and from talking with a couple of people, the possibilities I have come to are cult activity, witchcraft, aliens, or really messed up kids who somehow killed 2 one-ton bulls. My best guess is the cult option, but good old North Dakota is not exactly a hotspot for that kind of stuff. On YouTube, there was an episode of a show called Cattle Mutilations. Unexplained documentary, but it appears to be blocked now. That gave a good rundown of some of the history about this kind of thing happening all over the United States. CJ. Indeed, folks. Do you think it was a cult? It sounds like that is the best option here, folks, because remember, as I said, usually in these kinds of cases, scavengers and other animals tend to avoid the carcasses of these cattle mutilations for some reason, folks. 2, CJ doesn't mention if there was, well, I think very little blood found at the scene, or no blood at all. All he says is that the animal was dead, they couldn't figure out how, and that the genitalia was removed. So unless this cult has developed some new novel way of killing cattle quite easily with leaving no physical marks, that makes me think it could be the government, because they could have developed some kind of technology like this, folks. Because apparently all military technology is at least 20 years ahead of anything we have, so maybe they have that, but I can't be for sure. The government, cult, what do you make of it? Still, there are no obvious answers to any of it. But let's move on to the next article and read through this witness's story, and then we'll discuss both accounts in a little more detail at the end of the video. Now, the next story is titled Chetco River, Oregon, Sasquatch Massacre, the Gruesome Logging Camp Legend. The name of the story alone is almost unbelievable, folks. It's so out there. Apparently, this is a story that may be well known to some people at least. So let's read the full account and see where it goes. But let's start off at the beginning. During the late 1890s, a group of loggers and their families reportedly established a temporary camp along the remote Chetco River in southern Oregon. What began with enormous footprints and inexplicably displaced timber allegedly escalated into one of the most violent Sasquatch stories ever associated with the Pacific Northwest. Okay, very bizarre, but let's read basically the case file that gives a little details about what actually happened and who was involved. Date, late 1890s, possibly 1890. Time, primarily nighttime. Location, Chetco River, Curry County, southern Oregon. Setting, remote logging camp along a forested river corridor. Witnesses and witness? Approximately 12 loggers accompanied by their families. Reported by CJ. Phenomenon, alleged aggressive Sasquatch or unidentified hairy, hominids or humanoids. Environmental conditions, damp ground, dense forest, heavy underbrush, and extremely, and limited nighttime visibility, folks. So yeah, they didn't have a clear clue of what was actually attacking them. Only these vague, shadowy outlines that basically attacked in the dark. That is already just terrifying, folks. But let's read the actual account of the witnesses, or in this case, the one witness who basically is, backed up by having basically the other people of the camp also see the same phenomena. In the late 1890s, approximately 12 loggers and their families were camped in tents near the Chetco River in southern Oregon. The men had been cutting timber in the surrounding forest. Each morning, however, they discovered that sections of freshly cut timber had been moved and scattered around the work site. Some of the logs required 3 men to lift, yet somehow had been tossed, something had tossed them aside as though they were matchsticks. The only clues were enormous human-like footprints pressed into the damp earth. The loggers had already been experiencing problems with bears, so several men followed the tracks into the forest. The footprints passed through torn underbrush in areas where saplings appeared to have been uprooted. Eventually, the trail disappeared. Already we see details from, from other stories in this account already, with torn up tree saplings and, well, these large footprints. So it makes me think that, yeah, whatever was going on, even if these men didn't know what they were dealing with, yeah, that this has all the clear earmarks of a Bigfoot story. But let's read further in. That night, the entire camp was awakened by shrill screams coming from the nearby woods. The cries sounded almost human, but there was something unnatural about them. One of the loggers grabbed his rifle, lit a torch, and entered the darkness. Several other men armed themselves and followed him. A short time later, the first logger came rushing back through the underbrush. He collapsed in terror at the feet of the men who had followed him. At first, he could barely speak. When he finally regained enough composure to describe what he had seen, he claimed that he had encountered a massive hair-covered creature standing approximately 8 feet tall. According to the logger, the creature had yellow eyes, visible fangs, and hands shaped like a man's. His account immediately threw the camp into an uproar as people began to panic and, I imagine, wanting to get their families out there as quickly as possible. Which is very strange, folks, that these loggers would have their families with them, but yeah, I can imagine how terrified these men were at that point, but let's continue and see where this goes from here. The following night, 2 loggers decided that they would track and kill the creature before it could threaten the families. Carrying loaded rifles and a small lantern, the men disappeared into the forest behind the tents. Those remaining in camp soon heard screams, animalistic shrieks, and several bursts of gunfire coming from the darkness. Then everything became silent. When the 2 men failed to return, the remaining loggers gathered lanterns and torches. They fired their rifles into the air as they moved through the forest, hoping to frighten away whatever might be awaiting for them. Approximately half a mile from camp, they discovered evidence of a violent struggle. And we have to wonder, folks, if maybe these bodies were basically left there for these people to find, maybe as a warning. I've heard Bigfoot basically uprooting and basically throwing rocks at people, but never actually killing anyone, except in some basically stories where basically it's alleged to have happened. But like those stories, folks, I think this story is basically, almost completely unprovable, because I don't think Bigfoot really kills, but it could have happened. But let's read on and save off on any conclusions till we basically, get to the end of the, video, folks. The bodies of the 2 missing loggers had been torn apart. Their broken remains were scattered across the forest floor, and there were indications that the men had been slammed against nearby trees. Blood had collected on the surrounding vegetation and was reportedly dripping from branches high above the ground. The destruction suggested that the attackers possessed tremendous physical strength. The creature itself was gone. The only evidence left behind was a trail of blood-covered human-like footprints leading deeper into the forest. The surviving loggers returned to camp and began packing immediately. By the following day, the logging operation had been abandoned and the families had left the Chetco River area. Professional hunters reportedly entered the forest during the days that followed, but no trace of the creature has ever been found. And we have to ask, folks, what was it? It does sound like a Bigfoot or Sasquatch story, because it's all the earmarks of them, folks. But multiple people were apparently killed, so I kind of doubt that this account happened, folks. At least some of the details, because Bigfoot, as far as I know, folks, has never actually killed anyone. When we do hear stories of this happening, folks, they're a little out there, and basically they sound like basically campfire tales torn, from basically a newspaper from the 19th century about rabid animal beasts in the furthest forests killing people. So what could have actually happened was that these men, they encountered something they couldn't explain and then basically ran off in terror. Or maybe this is actually a case of Bigfoot actually killing somebody or multiple people here. I just can't be for sure. Either way, both stories, at least to me, clearly have some sort of human element. Either basically some people are lying or embellishing things, or there were more to the stories. Either way, we're at the end of this video, folks, so please go subscribe to my YouTube channel. Read comics, they're bad for you. You can use the YouTube link down below in the descriptions of the chat to go subscribe to me. Hit that like button for me. Make sure you're still subscribed. Leave some comments down below. Hit that bell for notifications. Hit the part of the bell that'll give you all future notifications, and please share this video out. I'm Chris Williams from the Scumdogs Kennel. Thank you all for joining me. I'll be back again tomorrow with another great video, so be sure to come back again then. Until next time, folks, I'll see you all again soon.